Higgsfield just made an update. We had Cinema Studio 1 and now we have 1.5. And while I was working on a project yesterday, it was pretty funny seeing as these functions were updating in real time. They added a 35, which replaces the 24 that was there before. And aperture is just an entirely new feature that gives control over the amount of blur, essentially. So I want to walk you through some tests that I did, comparing real shots with what Higgsfield can do. This is ShotDeck. ShotDeck is a shot library historically used by filmmakers to create pitch decks and mood boards. I've used ShotDeck to find several stills with the same settings that Higgsfield offers. We'll start with this one, which uses the Arri Alexa 35 and Panavision C series lenses. I took the information shown here and I made my own prompt. This is the result. I would say that it's pretty close. However, one thing I noticed about Higgsfield Cinema Studio is that they apply lens flares kind of arbitrarily. While anamorphic lenses do create those streaks, they don't just come out of nowhere. They are always motivated by some kind of a light source. Here I'll show you some real lens flares, starting with this one. As you can see, the sun is the primary light source for this lens flare, and the light is just stretched across the frame. Here you can see the two bright light sources are stretched. Again, here, sunlight, super bright, stretched across the screen. The brighter the light source, the more stretch you're going to see. So if you look at this lens flare, obviously it's coming from the sun, and then you compare it to what's going on in this AI image, you can see how unrealistic it is. Here you can see all of the settings that I used. It was important to me during these tests to be able to recreate these images using only text. To me, that's the best way to make sure that you're comparing what the tool can do with real life. One thing of note is that the anamorphic lens will create some stretching when it comes to the bokeh in the background, and it is somewhat represented here. When we look at how it's shown in real life, it's very subtle, but you can see that it's almost like a motion blur going up and down vertically. And the reason for that is just because of how the anamorphic lens is shaped. Lenses are circular. The thing in the center is going to be most in focus, and then as we radiate outwards, things start to get out of focus because of the nature of the circular lens. You can see her face is very much in focus. And then you get down here towards the bottom of where the lens would be. And even though she's in the foreground, the texture of her sweater gets a little out of focus and warped. You see a little bit of chromatic aberration at the edge here, where the colors are getting a little bit messed up compared to up here where the colors are more consistent and crisp. This is a typical thing when it comes to using real lenses. It's a desirable effect. Compare that with what we have here in Higgsfield. Again, this is the exact same type of lenses, supposedly, and the exact same camera, supposedly. When we look down here, that chromatic aberration is not really present, and the texture of her sweater is still just as in focus as it is up here. The result is that she looks a little bit more cut out, a little bit more like this could be a green screen. And that's not what we want from a realistic GenAI image. Ultimately, I think that the future looks like mixing live action with AI. And if we're going to do that, then we need to have really specific tools that allows us to use the same exact settings that we're using in real life with GenAI so that the blend is seamless. We're getting closer to that, but it's not perfect. I actually made a video before that went over all of the capabilities of Cinema Studio 1, but I didn't finish editing it. I complained a lot that there was no aperture control and no shutter speed control. And I also complained that there is no 35mm lens. 35mm lens is the quintessential, most common cinematic lens that is cited as being natural. People say the 35 and maybe the 50 are closest to the human eye, and that's why people like them so much. That's why filmmakers gravitate towards those two lenses so much. The human eye is a biological thing, so what you're really seeing is that the eyeball can become both 35 and everything in between up till, I believe, 55 millimeters. Our eyes are squishy and they have muscles around them, and so our focal lengths do shift. But the concept is there, 35, 50, very standard. So with Cinema Studio 1, I was very surprised that they didn't have a 35 and instead it was a 24. Aperture is really, really important to controlling the image when it comes to filmmaking. So I was super, super excited to see that they've added it. The other thing that we're missing though is shutter speed. Shutter speed can be demonstrated with this demo. I made this in Higgsfield, Sony Venice, Panavision C series. Here you can see a big difference. When you're shooting a real film on a real camera, there's a thing called shutter speed, and it dictates how much motion blur you get. So if you have a low shutter speed, like 1/12th, you're going to get a ton of motion blur. You'll see that in a lot of music videos. You'll see that in some commercials where there's this stylized the motion blur going on. You kind of have a disorienting effect. The higher the shutter speed, the more crisp the image will be. So you'll see it a lot in sports. You'll see it a lot in football. The shutter speed will be super, super high. And that means there's very little to no motion blur. And the entire image is just super crisp. But in cinema, we don't want it to be that crisp because it looks video-y and fake. Cinema usually strives to create a naturalistic looking image. So 1/48th shutter speed is what this would be. And just as a demonstration, if you look forward and don't move your eyes, just kind of stay focused forward and then wave your hand in front of your face, you'll see that your hand is blurry. Like you're not seeing the edges of your hand. The human eye and the brain interprets things with a little blur. So when you come over here and you look at what Higgsfield did, maybe because it's a sports image, it just automatically assumed that the shutter speed should be cranked. Like this would be like, oh, I don't know, like 1/100th, 1/200th. If Cinema Studio allowed us to control shutter speed, then we could get even more accurate images. But unfortunately, it determines shutter speed by assuming what you want based on your prompt. And that means it's very inaccurate. So the higher the aperture, the more stuff is going to be in focus. The lower the aperture, the less stuff that's going to be in focus. That means that these buildings in the background are pretty in focus, which is what I wanted, because in the reference image, if you look at these mountains and even some of the buildings beyond here, they're pretty in focus. So now that we have control over the aperture, that allowed me to get more control over the image. Here I compared a still from Severance. And again, I'm not going for perfect representations of these actors. So the aperture allowed me to have an accurate amount of blur here in the background. You can see quite a lot of blur here in this background. Overall, I think it's pretty good, although it's doing that annoying lens flare thing. At least here it's motivated by this light. But honestly, if that amount of lens flare is caused by that light, you would think there'd be a lot more up here. I compared a still from The Last of Us, Ari Alexa 35, Cook S4 lens. I did 50 millimeter. The biggest thing with this test that I noticed is more of an AI note. When I rendered his beard, I just noticed the hair is much thicker than it should be, like each strand. Whereas this image, created with supposedly the same exact lens and supposedly the same exact camera, the hairs are much thinner. Here it's like the focus of the image is the hairs. It's very distracting. So despite all the hype about AI, there are still a lot of things that AI can't do that is just easier to do in real life. So it's going to take a while to transition. And honestly, the best form of integration right now is pickups. You'll go shoot a project, and then once you're editing or reviewing dailies, you might realize that you need another scene or another shot. And AI can be a perfect solution for that. But the only way that you can really do that is if the AI can perfectly match what you've made. Often a pickup could just be like one shot that they didn't get in a scene. They might realize later on that, oh, we need an insert, or in other words, a close-up of this prop in this space, or we need a close-up of the character reacting, or some other narrative element that's pivotal to the scene. If AI could match shutter speed, shutter angle, ISO, aperture, so that when it's put up on a big screen, it's seamless, that would be invaluable. These options are not just nice to haves. Aperture, shutter speed, shutter angle, ISO, focal length, lens type, these are all the tools that we have as filmmakers, as directors, as cinematographers and creatives to tell the story. Direction is about controlling everything on screen and everything that you hear to tell the story that you want. And the less control we have over these things, the more we are forfeiting our vision to the AI. And we never want to be in a situation where we become the tools to the AI, where we are giving up so much because the AI just can't do it, or because it's easier to just let the AI do what it thinks is best, that we lose sight of our own vision and then we don't make original content anymore. As you can see in Shot Deck, there's such a variety of camera angles and feelings and compositions that, yes, you can get it with AI, but oftentimes, especially for the more abstract kind of imagery or compositions that may feel a little bit off or unusual, AI tries to do the common denominator. It tries to make things look beautiful and nice. If it doesn't think that it looks nice, it's not going to do it. The perfect shot is not always the best shot to tell a story. We need the ability to make imperfect shots.